Welcome, everyone. We will start in a few minutes. Great, let's get started. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see all of you, and thank you for joining Global Washington's conference throughout the day. There's been a lot of talk today about how to shift power, funding, resources, and dignity to those on the front lines of development challenges. And, I know each of us individually and institutionally have been grappling with our own role in this complex ecosystem. So this is why I've been so personally excited throughout today for the theme of Global Washington's conference this year on advancing transformative philanthropy. There's a lot to unpack and a lot of hypotheses that we've been testing as we consider the inherent power dynamics between funder and recipients. So as we kick off this closing plenary today, let me personally thank Global Washington for inviting me to be part of today's important discussions. My name is Fatema Sumar, and I'll be moderating this discussion, reflecting on my own experiences across academia, government, and civil society as it comes to international development. So let me just scene set for a moment today's session, and then we'll get underway. This session is going to discuss the recent trends of funders for global development and the desire to support local leaders and civil society building. So each organization we're going to hear from today seeks to partner in unique ways to create lasting change. You're going to hear about the Global Fund for Women's feminist approach to funding movements, the incredible advocacy work done by Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, and the philosophy of trust-based philanthropy that the Seattle International Foundation relies on for its work in Central America. As you're listening, you may be curious about what some of these approaches have been that are working for others. What are some of these different models of philanthropy that your organization may want to adopt? What are some of the challenges and failures that others are encountering on our own collective journey to transform philanthropy? So I'm really excited for today's session. And to join me, we have three inspirational people to learn from today. Their full bios are in the WOVA app, so I won't read through all of them. Please do check out the app to learn more about their incredible work. But let me quickly introduce first Dr. Aisha Jumaan. She's the president of the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. Dr. Jumaan has over 30 years of experience in public health, including viral vaccine preventable diseases, cervical and breast cancer research, surveillance, maternal child health and nutrition, primary health care, and women in development. I'm also joined by Mr. Obed Kabanda, who's joining us from Kampala, Uganda today. He is our Senior Director of Global Partnerships, Global Innovations, and Accountability Lead for the Global Fund for Women. Obed has been for over 20 years part of the civil society ecosystem, influencing government and philanthropic funding partners. And he's really on the front lines in shifting the way global gender justice, public health, and other social change funding efforts can embrace locally led approaches. And finally, I'm joined by Mirte Postema. She's the Senior Program Officer at the Seattle International Foundation. And Mirte leads the Anti-Impunity Fund and the Independent Journalism Fund at SIF. Prior to joining SIF, she worked as a researcher for Human Rights Watch on Central America and Mexico, and she's also contributed political analysis on Guatemala to the Economist Intelligence Unit. So it's such a great pleasure for me to be with all three of you today. Welcome to our session, our closing plenary of the conference today. What I'd love to do is start with an opening question for each of you and give you about 3 to 5 minutes to answer each. And then based on this conversation and what you put out there, I would love to go a little bit deeper into some of the models and the work that each of your organizations are doing. So if that works, Aisha, I'd love to turn to you first. Could you describe what is one way to describe your evolution of your organization's philanthropy? And share with us one thing you're doing now that you weren't doing 5 or 10 years ago, so that we can all learn from your own journey. And I'd love to pose that same question also, Obed and Mirte, to you after Aisha's finished. So Aisha, over to you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Fatema. And I'm honored to be with you all today. And thank you, Global Washington, for the invitation to participate in today's session. Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation is a young organization. We just turned 5 years old. And when we started, we had 3 missions that we wanted to focus on: is to advocate in the U.S. support for the Saudi-led war on Yemen, to provide relief to Yemen, especially to hard-to-reach areas where international community could not reach, and engage youth in the peace process. So our evolution was a journey from an initial response to crisis to a more holistic approach. Our focus initially was on immediate relief efforts, addressing urgent needs, especially food distribution to families, providing clean water to address the largest cholera outbreak reported in history, with over 2.3 million suspected cases. And we also were providing medications because at that point in time when we started, there was a blockade in Yemen, and the economic decline made medicine availability in the market very scarce. Over time, however, our efforts evolved to include more sustainable development projects, such as supporting education, providing vocational training, especially targeting young people, and especially in orphanages between the ages of 14 and 18, because we knew that they would leave the orphanage and have nothing to do. And then we also embarked on income generation projects and targeting women. We also provided nutritious food to children who are discharged from malnutrition centers, because many of them, once they left the nutrition center, experienced relapse, and many of them died. So we also diversified our income generation projects to families to include animal husbandry, beekeeping, Yemeni traditional basket weaving. This was an exciting project where we offered older women funds to support younger women to learn the process. The older women were just really very happy because they felt that they were going to have this form of art move to the next generation, but also they made money out of it. Next year, we're planning to start supporting women who do traditional Yemeni embroidery, and we would help them market that overseas. So from our work in the foundation in terms of insight towards creating a more equal and stronger partnership, our work was always done in coordination with the communities where we serve. So it was important for us to understand the local needs. This involved that listening to local voices and incorporating their perspective into our initiative. This provided us with a more relevant and effective projects because those came from the community. Building local partnership, we worked with local organizations and local community leaders because we needed to, each area in Yemen is very different. And so we leveraged local knowledge and networks, ensuring that we were working in an appropriate way and accepted to the community, especially because we're working in a war zone. So we did not want to step on anybody's foot or do the wrong thing, because that meant that people who are volunteering for us are going to be in harm's way. And focusing on sustainability. So moving beyond immediate relief, We were investing in sustainable solutions that empower communities, especially women. And that was something that we were very happy and the community was very pleased to have. Adapting to change, again, being flexible in such an environment, I think development in general, but in a war zone, being flexible was the most important part of our work and evolving to the needs of the community. So that meant we adjusted our strategies and reallocated resources based on what we were learning. Promoting equity, we serve the most hard-to-reach populations and the most vulnerable. I don't know of any other organization that was able to reach the places where we reached. It took our volunteers sometimes over 9 hours of travel time to reach some of these communities. Learning and evolving was a big thing for us. We were constantly learning from what we're doing. And a lot of the times before we embarked on a large project, we started with a pilot project, and then we learned what we can do and we cannot do. And then we, increase the reach of our projects. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Perfect. And there's so many themes there, Aisha. Thank you for putting all that out there because there's so many themes I'd love to come back to, especially as we tie into advocacy and how you bring local voices into that conversation. So thanks for flagging some of those, and I promise we will circle back. Obed, I would love to turn to you. Same question for you. Tell us a little bit about your organization's journey, which has been really phenomenal. What are you doing now that you weren't doing 5 to 10 years ago? And what can you share with our audience as we think about transformative philanthropy?
Thank you so much, Fatema, for this wonderful opportunity. I must say that Global Fund for Women for over 35 years now plus has been championing an agenda and a mission to fund bold, ambitious feminist movements and activists who mobilize for change against discrimination, violence, oppression, but also responding to crisis. And we have been for all these years resourcing grassroots gender justice organizations with a vision of achieving a world that is more just and equitable. And I must go specific to your question, what has changed? For the last 5 years, I should say, we have evolved a lot, philanthropy, because for many years we were, looking around for individuals, smaller organizations from over 180 countries, and we used to give small grants, look around, determine which ones we are giving funding, which ones we are not, and we had to evolve and change the way we do work. And I must say that we have set in motion flexible core multi-year funding approach for gender and climate justice movements globally by supporting and resourcing feminist movements that drive long-term systemic change. I should say for the last 35 years plus, we have worked with over 5,000 grantee organizations in over 180 countries and being able to move over $200 million to those that need it. And specifically, what has changed? I should say that we have embraced what we have called a movement-led approach to grant making. And when I say movement-led approach to grant making, I mean to say we recognize grassroots people power as one of the most effective mechanisms to creating and sustaining long-term transformation and systemic social change. We do this through collaborative grant making among a network of grassroots partners. We support, movements not only to determine where funding goes, who receives the funding, but also what success looks like, the metrics of measuring success. What is it that we are looking up to changing in the work that we are doing? And in so doing, we are trying to embrace the fact that decisions have to be made by those who are being impacted by the issues. We have also flipped the script of a top-down practice of traditional philanthropy by saying it's the grassroots, it's the movements who daily live within the societies that know the needs, that the communities have, and therefore must respond in specific ways that they are very much conversant with. So we have transitioned, I should say, from funding individual organizations to funding feminist movements. And we have used an analogy of a tree versus a forest, where you're looking at how to leverage the strength of different grassroots partners working together, leveraging their models and what they are good at, and being in concert with each other to support programs that bring about systemic change, other than competing for resources, competing amongst themselves, and spending lots of time engaging into social change work that do not bring about change. So yeah, it's been a lot of work, I should say, for the last 4 years. And the disrupting of the systemic social change is happening. We are seeing accelerated achievement of gender justice goals, with many actors working together vis-a-vis when we used to fund them individually as one organization. So I want to stop it at that in the interest of time. Thanks.
No, but I would love to come back because, I think there's a lot here that I want our audience to make sure. This is a pretty big shift from funding individual organizations to funding movements. And I'd love to come back to you to really help us understand, what does that operationally mean for you as an organization? How do you do that? How do you also understand risk, accountability, and success and measurement in that process? So some food for thought. I'm going to come back to some of those questions. But thank you for laying that out, because it's a very different way than a lot of organizations are working. So I think it's an incredible opportunity to learn from what Global Fund has been doing in that evolution. Mirte, I would love to come to you. Seattle International Foundation has been working in Central America for a long time. You have an incredible track record of success. How has CIF been evolving its own journey in the last 5 to 10 years? And share with us a little bit, now that you're on the front lines there, what you're seeing in some of the transformations of philanthropy from the CIF perspective.
Sure. Thank you, Fatema, and such a pleasure to share this space with all of you. Thank you for inviting me. Maybe to start, the Seattle International Foundation, as you mentioned, an organization, we focus exclusively on Central America. We support initiatives that promote good governance and equity by supporting a stronger civil society. And we are an intermediary foundation, which means that we receive funds from larger donors or individuals, and part of that money we redistribute. So how do we work? Essentially in three main areas. We do grant making with our 2 programs, one that supports youth movements in Central America, the other one supporting independent journalism in Central America. We also do advocacy in our anti-impunity program and our program in DC, to make sure that the concerns that our partners have come across to decision makers in DC, and we bring people together. So that is both the coordination of donors, and information sharing, joint strategizing, but also organizing like a large conference, for example, every year in Central America, in which we bring together different sectors, both NGOs, civil society, government, business, philanthropic community. So those are our main kind of 3 approaches. And in the last couple of years, I think we've seen nationwide, worldwide, big reflections about power inequality, racial justice, gender justice. That's definitely been the case for me, also as a white European woman working in Central America. And also when you work for an intermediary organization, I think it's very healthy to think, what is the added value that we have? What is the role that we play in movements? So those reflections in a way come natural. And when I learned about trust-based principles and trust-based philanthropy, that really resonated with me. Maybe also because most of my career, I've worked in civil society. Many of my colleagues have as well. So we've been kind of on the other side of the receiving end. And maybe some of you have heard about these trust-based principles before, in a kind of a way of like less requirements, right? Trust, and less stringent approaches, so like more flexible funds, multi-year funds. But it's really, and also I recommend, there's an excellent resource on this, a trust-based philanthropy project that has very interesting guides, summaries on their website. So trust-based philanthropy project. In essence, working and trust-based principles is a way to like flip the script, right? When traditional philanthropy is a person, an organization that has money and thus power, and organizations need to do what they can to be attractive, right? To have to invest a lot of time and money and energy in being, in appealing. The way that a trust-based approach works is kind of, it mirrors in a way, in a better way, what we are trying to achieve too, in terms of equality and justice. It flips that script of power in that you're trying to be aware of the power imbalance. You try to mitigate that power imbalance and realize what obstacles are there. You ask what obstacles are there and think, why, for example, all these requirements that are often needed when you do a grant application, all kinds of documents that you need to upload. Do we really need these documents? One, do we legally need these documents? I mean, the short answer to that is that like the IRS requires hardly any of these kind of things. Do we really need this information? And if we need this information, is there an easier way to get this? Because honestly, the organizations that we support because we believe in them and we believe in their work. And what we want is that they have the time and energy and the support that they need to do their work, instead of preparing all kinds of documents that are filed away in a place that maybe we don't even use. Right? So what are we doing and why are we doing that? And how can we do this differently? How can we make it easier for people to do their work instead of making all kinds of requirements and restrictions on this? More flexible funding, I think, for everyone who's worked in civil society. Like, we know that the situation changes very quickly, particularly in politically very kind of volatile environments. And people can just be more effective if they have more flexibility to spend their money. People are more effective when they can focus on doing the work instead of filing all kinds of reports. And we can be more effective if we have a much more open relationship, right? In which people feel more supported. They can come to us with concerns. And we can also see what are maybe some shared challenges that organizations have. How can we play a role as an intermediary in addressing those issues in a more strategic way and in a more constructive way? Those are some initial, I guess, principles that that maybe set the tone, but it's really, you're doing the same work, but we're doing it in a different way in which we hopefully have more constructive relationships and give people the opportunity to do their work in a more sustainable way.
Mirte, what I loved about what both you and Obed said, and in fact, so I'm going to say to the Global Washington organizers, the name of this session is The Changing Role of Funders, but what you have both said is flip the script. You both said that in different contexts in different ways. So I'm going to propose that we change the title of this plenary to Flipping the Script. And let's talk about a little bit about what this really means. Many of us, and for those in our audience here, maybe you're a grantee and you work on the giving side. Maybe you are an organization that's an implementer, right? And you're trying to figure out how to get the money and then how to spend the money well, and then do the accountability back. Maybe you're an advocacy organization that's trying to figure out its own ecosystem as part of this and doing a lot on a shoestring budget, like I know Aisha has been working on the work in Yemen. So we all approach this ecosystem from different vantage points. Let's talk a little bit deeper about what you've all seen about flipping the script and what we could take away from this. So Obed, I want to start with you because one of the things I observe about the development sector, and I'm getting older now, so I've been around the block a little bit here, is that every 5 to 7 years there's a new buzzword, and we think about these new buzzwords, and it used to be, it used to be a whole bunch. It used to be capacity building, then at some point it was resilience. Now I feel like it's localization, and even as we think about how we talk about feminism, and talking about these terms. Oftentimes organizations want to get on that bandwagon. So we want to say we're progressive, we work in certain ways, we do all of this, but it's actually very difficult to change our bureaucratic DNA to show up differently. So you spoke a little bit and you laid the foundation a little bit for what it means to be a feminist funder. and what it means to support movements, not organizations, and to support forests, not trees, if I got that right. All right, so my question to you is nuts and bolts. So that's a philosophy that Global Fund for Women has been approaching. It's been a pretty big evolution as you look back over the last 5-7 years or so. How do you really do that? Give us a little bit more nuts and bolts. What does that mean as a grantee to these organizations and movements? And if you are on the recipient side or wanting to be on the recipient side of this or wanting to push others to think in more movement-led ways, what do we need to take away from this conversation?
Thank you so much for that, much more putting it into context. I should say that by and large, this is a very huge shift that we've had, and we've been guided by listening to the grassroots that we've been working with over the years. I should say that we have over, like I said, 5,000 long-term trusted network of organizations in India, in Pacific, in the Caribbean, in Africa, all over the world. And our experiences for the last 30 years had been that, yes, we have been doing this work. We have been, giving these small grants, sometimes single year, 2-year. What does it make? What change do they make? Sometimes calling for proposals where people are spending hours and hours writing proposals and then asking them to, submit reports every quarter, every media or every year. Sometimes you're not even reading these reports. It's been quite hell, I should say, because back to your point of every 5 years, yes, buzzwords, but I must say that this has been much more inward systemic change that we have felt we need to make over time, leave alone the COVID and all this that happened. COVID came when we had started this journey, I should say, and the belief of the forest versus the tree is out of the notion that there is power when grassroots work together. There is a lot of accelerated sharing of lessons, sharing of expertise, and leveraging strength of each of these partners when they work together. There is co-creation of programs that fit and suit the needs of those communities that are being, addressed with the issues that they are addressing. So our approach has been informed by all that background in terms of how do we change the ecosystem? How do we become responsive to the needs? How do we even move away as Global Fund for Women to even reading proposals? We don't at the moment. We no longer ask people to write proposals. We instead say if there is an issue on gender-based violence, if there is an issue of sexual reproductive rights, can we have partners in a specific region working in? Like now we have a climate justice movement in Africa. We have informal workers' rights in India. And all these organizations working on these issues, they come together. And one step that we do with them is to do a landscape analysis. They do a landscape analysis. We facilitate all that with them to do a landscape analysis to identify the issues. And having identified the issues, they begin to think through within themselves as a partner network. Who is strong on what issue? If we want to engage with the government, if we want to inform communities, if we want to build capacity internally, what does it mean? And who has this capacity within our ecosystem as a network of partners within a specific region? And when they do that, they prioritize what actions they want to undertake. And that prioritization is basically themselves. We are not even anywhere in the circle. We are only facilitating this. And then they will reach out and say, hey, we have a whole listing of 10 actions, priority actions. We have 7 partners, and we need $500,000 to implement this action over a period of 2-3 years. And that's when we come in. We only come in to resource these partnerships. But also I want to add that beyond using our trusted global network of organizations, we have a tool we are calling the Gender Justice Data Hub, which uses AI, and it's a unique tool that combines insights gleaned from a vast data set with sense making from local activists. And we use this tool to identify emerging movements. The ones I first talked about is people beginning to convene, seeking to address specific issues and do a landscape analysis, but we equally do identify emerging movements using a gender justice data hub that uses AI. And therefore, our approach is that we give these feminist movements the trust, the respect, the funding they need to win large-scale systemic social change beyond what one tree would achieve other than a forest, because then you're able to achieve, a lot when you're working together. And by that, we are building even more solidarity, more trust, more collective power than one individual grantee organization would achieve if they were working alone. And I should say we have seen greater changes. Last year was our last year of funding individual organizations. We funded over 499 organizations with over 28.5 million. But now we are funding over 10 movements across the globe, in the Pacific, in the Caribbean. And when I say 10 movements, this could be about 20 or so, or 10 or 15 grantee partners within a single movement. So we are shifting that and harnessing the power of collective work together with partners and making sure that we can achieve a lot together by supporting feminist movements that are controlled by themselves and are shifting the way they do the work and determining what they need by themselves.
Obed, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the word movement is very powerful. Another word that was coming to mind is the word current, like an ocean current, and how there's a lot of dynamism within these currents and movements of people, and how all three of you talked about your starting point is listening to local voices, local communities, and then figuring out where you add value in the ecosystem versus dictating from the beginning where you're interested in. And I just want to put a finer point here, especially for those that are on the foundation, funder side, donor side here in this conversation. That's a really big switch of power, to not start with what you're interested in, but to really focus first and foremost on the communities that you want to be involved in supporting. What are they are interested in first? And so I just wanted to say that in a slightly different way. What I also heard here, and Mirte, I would love for you to come in, and also for all three of you, as we're having this conversation, if there's resources that you want to put links to in the chat for our audience members, please go ahead and do that. You mentioned the hub. Mirte, you mentioned a resource guide. Aisha, you may have others as well. So please do that so others can continue to learn from your journeys. I'm going to paraphrase what you said, Obed. What I heard is lessen the bureaucratic burden. My words, not yours, but that's what I heard. I hope that resonates. Mirte, can you reflect a little bit? Your role at SIF, I think, at Seattle International Foundation is really interesting because, like other organizations, you're both a grantee, but you're also getting funds from other bigger donors. So you're almost you are that intermediary role in many ways, right? So you both get to set the tone and get to make some of those decisions of how to allocate funds, but you're still also applying for funds yourself and making sure that your big bosses, at least in the funding world, are happy with the direction you're going in. There may be others on this call listening in similar positions. Can you reflect a little bit of that as you're moving more towards trust-based philanthropy and really lessening this bureaucratic burden, really listening and prioritizing based on local needs? How do you have that journey collectively with those that are funding you? And how do you get them to believe and buy into that mission? Because that may not be their starting point.
Correct. No, well, I must say there are a lot of foundations that are also exploring much more flexibility. I think since the start of the pandemic, that's really increased, and I think it's improved relationships with partners a lot. So many of especially individuals, but also the larger foundations that support SIF have a similar approach. But of course, that's not always the case, and we are also bound to a certain extent, right, to the reporting requirements that we have. But I think that is also our role as intermediary, to try to absorb that as much as possible so that the organizations on the ground can do their work. And in that sense, as you mentioned, this flipping the script and listening, it's really a different approach. And even if there are certain requirements that, for example, something like audits doesn't really fit into the kind of philosophy that we would have, but if there are like more reporting requirements, I think there are still a lot of ways in which you can work and you can show up in a different way that reflect those like trust-based principles. I think to like have that humility, right, and a consciousness, self-reflection, like being self-critical about how do I show up? What do I know? Am I being prescriptive? Like there is a different, what you say resonates differently, right? When you have money as when you're just spitballing some ideas, like be aware of those kind of things. And we have very like constructive ongoing conversations with both our donors, the organizations we receive money from, and our partners. I think that is a really big element of doing things differently, right? Really being part of a movement and seeing how can we contribute instead of just throwing some money around. So I mentioned before, like the requirements, the legal requirements are relatively minimal in the United States. Organizations might still have like their own internal processes, right, in foundations. But even in those cases, I think as an individual and as a program officer, you can show up in a different way. You can implement a lot of those models, even if you might not be able to provide multi-year funding. You can, for example, when you write your grant recommendations, give grants for more general issues, for example, for like supporting the editorial line of a publication or supporting like the general mission of an organization, instead of doing really project-based funding for, X amount of events or X amount of activities. That gives more flexibility to organizations too. If they need to adjust the time period that they're working in, if they want to move some things around in a budget, to just be open to that and make that easy. I think those are things that you can do. The way that you do conversations, right? The way that you do check-ins. I think we've all, who've been on the receiving end of these conversations, we've had so many of these conversations that you have, like you're talking for an hour, in the last 5 minutes, you hear if what you've been saying, like if this falling well or not. You can do that the other way around too, right? If you already know that you like this organization and you've been following their work, like this is more work for program officers, right? Like you inform yourself better, you read what they're doing, you look at all these things instead of having them send it to you. And you can say, I have X amount of money available. I love the work that you're doing. Let's talk more about how you do this. That's such a different tone to a conversation. Yeah. And it's much more constructive to work that way. And those are all things that you can implement as an individual when you're working.
I think I'm going to amend my lesson, the bureaucratic burden, after your comments, Mirte, to break the bureaucratic burden. And that's a role we can play. Aisha, I want to bring you into the conversation because, one of the things I'm struck by of the incredible work your organization's been doing, and you alluded to this in the beginning, a lot of your work in the beginning, and I know still is about crisis and immediate humanitarian relief. Even as you've been working on that, though, you've also been doing incredible work here in the United States on the advocacy side. Can you talk a little bit, what does flipping the script of more transformative philanthropy mean for someone like yourself, volunteer organization, volunteer capacity, doing incredible advocacy on what I understand is a shoestring budget? How can our audience members who want to be supportive in these types of spaces appreciate the perspective of organizations like yours?
Thank you, Fatema. The Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation advocacy work was actually done with no budget, zero budget. But we were able to harness the goodwill of a lot of different organizations that came to our support. So it started with me, just really me, trying to figure out how do we do this. And what is amazing about Generation Z is they are really interested in social justice. So my first volunteers were high school students here in Mercer Island, where many of them started doing, asking me to go and give presentation at the school, and in the community, in book clubs, in churches, in mosques. And that evolved as, we started to know more people, then our advocacy works increased. So I'm going to go over some of the things we've done. One is that advocacy is a core component of our mission, as I stated earlier. So Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation conducted many presentations and targeting the American public in schools, universities, churches, mosques. Public events included the Seattle Women's March. They asked me to go and speak at the Seattle Women's March, which was a big highlight and very important for me. Then we conducted webinars that included congressional staffers, US government, including the State Department. I did a briefing for the State Department about what's going on in Yemen. We had a session where all the US government agencies were on and gave me a 20-minute presentation to talk to them about what's going on in Yemen and the impact of the war. It was very telling that many of them had no idea of the impact of the war on the local population, whether it's from the malnutrition, from the food crisis, to the health impact. A lot of that was news to many of the people we were speaking to. So the advocacy the goal of our advocacy was to raise awareness about the war in Yemen, the impact on the population, and the U.S. role in the war to influence public opinion and drive policy change. The second thing, as I said, we are a volunteer organization, so all our funds went to Yemen for relief work because every dollar in Yemen counted, and we could not afford to spend any of it in the U.S. And so what that meant is we prioritized activities that have the highest impact. So we targeted audiences that we knew are going to be interested in this and support us. And that included university students. So I spoke to almost every university, and so many universities throughout the US, from Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C. to New York. And we also did 2 events here at the University of Washington. In one of the events, we had Representative Adam Smith come and speak. We invited people from Washington, D.C. who were collaborating with us. And that was, in the big auditorium, and there was only standing room space because there was so much interest in what's going on in Yemen. We also leveraged social media. Social media was a great place where it identified who was interested in Yemen and, connecting with those who are interested in Yemen. Building coalitions, that was, and partnership. I think this was the most important part of our advocacy work in Yemen. Again, when you have no budget, you need to, leverage in-kind support from other organizations. So we partnered with Spin Films that made a movie about malnutrition in Yemen called Hunger Ward, and we did many webinars with them after doing the movie. So the movie was extremely moving, heart-wrenching, and after that, we discussed and asked people to do action items, call your Congress, write letters, sign a petition. We also had the head of the World Food Program join us. We had many national and international agencies interested in peace join us. We had, the Peace Institute in New York join us. We had, Geneva groups joining us. So a lot of that was very important. We've also partnered with many of the anti-war organizations, including the Friends Committee of National Legislation, Code Pink, Demand Progress, Oxfam, and many others. And the Friends Committee and Code Pink and Demand Progress devoted a whole year of their activities pushing for Yemen and advocating legislative change for Yemen. So that was really very important. In 2022, we organized for an International Day of Solidarity for Yemen. We had over 300 organizations participate in that. 200 were national organizations and 100 were international organizations. For that webinar, we had over 1,000 people who joined the Zoom call and was broadcasted on YouTube and Facebook. We had parliamentary speakers from the US, the UK, and France, including Rep. Ro Khanna from California, Cornel West, Jeremy Corbyn from the UK, and we also included Yemeni voices in that webinar. These partnerships brought together the diverse skills, resources, and networks, making our advocacy work more robust and far-reaching. Also focusing on policy impact. In 2019, with our coalition, we were able to pass the Yemen War Power Resolution in both the US House, the House and the Senate. This was a stark contrast to when we tried earlier with only 21 House representatives voted for us. We got that to pass in 2019. Unfortunately, President Trump vetoed it, but he stopped the mid-air refueling for the Saudi jets bombing Yemen. So that was a win for us even, but also that gave us a lot of media attention. So media was calling us from everywhere to talk about Yemen, when in fact, before that, there was no mention of Yemen in most of the major US news media. Empowering local voices, ensuring that the voices of the Yemeni people impacted by the war, both in US and Yemen, these firsthand accounts were important and made a compelling case for change and influence in public opinion and policy. In terms of leveraging public engagement, is mobilizing the public through awareness campaigns. And so, as I said, we did a lot of education, petitions, and all of that. But we also realized that the Saudis were paying attention to what we were doing. So they were modifying their behavior. Every time there was a vote, they would give in to something. At the end, they agreed to a ceasefire that has held for over a year now, which is a relief to the people of Yemen. In terms of funders, I think they need to recognize that our work is we need to have a holistic approach. We cannot keep doing emergency work without stopping the cause of this emergency. Yemen was a man-made crisis. It wasn't, a disaster, a natural disaster. So without the advocacy work that was much needed to stop this, we would have continued to, invest in something that would not stop. So I think funders need to recognize that as much as they want to support emergency relief work, they also need to fund advocacy work, because that's really is what's going to help you in the crisis in a country. A value of a long-term commitment. Again, when we started doing this in 2015, I was a lone voice. It took many years to build the coalitions, to get people to understand. So it's not a one-time deal. And we're still working on it. We are in the 9th year, and we're still working on it. So I think the funders need to recognize that.
And let me just say, Aisha, just it's incredible on this completely shoestring budget, what your organization has been able to do in Yemen, and huge appreciation to the work that you and all the volunteers have been doing. And your point here, and I know we're wrapping up to time, so let me just summarize a little bit. And I'm sorry, I think we lost Obed. I know he's in Kampala, so maybe he had internet connections. So I hope I can do justice to also his amazing contributions here. Let me just try to summarize a little bit for our audience some of my key takeaways from being with you, three inspirational people, and your organizations, and the work all of your organizations are doing here, and the funders of these organizations as well. So a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight. The first is this idea of really centering our approach and strategies, not so much on what we think, but on actually those in local communities who can be much more agenda setters. I've heard that consistently from all three of you, of the power of voice in agenda setting, and for how the resources should be spent. This idea that we can actually shift bureaucratic models altogether. In the US, we become very American, even if we come from all around the world. Ultimately, a lot of our bureaucracy, whether not just in governments, but in civil society as well, can end up becoming very bureaucratic. And we then transfer a lot of those costs to others, which ends up taking a lot of their time. So each of you in your own ways have highlighted what breaking that bureaucratic burden can look like, either for yourselves as intermediaries, as funders, or those of you on the front lines of implementation and design, or doing a lot of it with hardly any resources in the case of the work in Yemen on advocacy. The third thing I've heard is when we think about transformation and philanthropy, when we think about the localization agenda, it's not enough to just transfer power or to give more voice. In fact, what we're looking for is to really flip the entire script and think completely differently about our approach, our starting point, our intermediary points of our power in the ecosystem, and then those end results can look like. And then the last thing is, Obed's not with us, but I just wanted to kind of use his analogy, which is quite powerful, around how collectively together we could think much more about forests and not trees. Obed, you're back. So great. Thank you for, I was just saying this idea at the end of the day that we're all in it together. We are all fundamentally trying to advance change in systemic ways for communities all around the world. And so how we can all work together, trees in this individual forest, how we can work in that approach, I think really is the power of this transformation that has already started for many of us, but still has some ways to go for the rest of us as we complete that journey. I know we're at time. I'm so honored to be on this journey with all of you together. Congratulations again for the incredible work you're doing, and to Global Washington for convening and to have this really important conversation. Kristen, thanks for letting us be part of your journey today, and to all of you that joined from Seattle, but also all around the world. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Fatema. Thank you to all the speakers today. This was truly inspiring. This session, now called Flipping the Script. Again, this session was inspiring. We started the day with Rebecca Darwent from Philanthropy Together, who really talked about collective funds from individual donors. And then we went into learning from the Amazon and Give to Asia about disaster funding. And of course, we had our breakout sessions where everyone could really dive into very specific issues they're called Recasting the Table and Community-Driven Solutions. And we actually got to see one of the films and talk to the filmmaker among the differences. And we had Yawa Hansen Kwao, who's an amazing advocate and author. So altogether, this has been very powerful. And from what I come away with, many people, as Fatema just said, talked about the community-led difference and self-determination and trust-based philanthropy. And what this is all meaning actually is a mind shift from traditional philanthropy to something very, very different. And we know that whenever there is a mind shift, that's going to take time. It's a process, but it also has to be deliberate. As this group was talking about, you have to actually put steps into place to either encourage that mind shift or reflect that mind shift. And again, I feel like over the past several years, and someone said this, maybe prompted by COVID, people have been understanding the value of what's called localization or shifting things to be more local. But if we don't have a very deliberate process to make this happen, then it won't happen, both from funders and from practitioners and from all of us in this global development community. So I'm very excited about the future and all of you being here today. We had people from all over the world join us today. I want to thank you all for contributing. And if you are contributing more and you're coming to our in-person conference in Seattle next Thursday, I'm really excited to continue that conversation. Several of the speakers will draw from what happened today and expand and dive in deeper to some of these topics. If you're not able to join us in Seattle, please continue to be active in Whova. If you haven't found that little community tab in Whova, please look for it, because you can do icebreakers. Again, you can do discussion boards. You can pose your own questions. There's some provocative questions in there you can answer. So there's a lot of ways to interact, even if you're not going to be in Seattle. So with that, we'll bring this portion of our conference to close. Thank you all for contributing and being here today. And we'll see you next week if you're in Seattle. If not, we'll see you in Whova. Thank you all.